And Rathin Roy still with us. William, apologies I interrupted you, but you were talking about what you make of the budget arithmetic as well as the focus of the government on things like privatization, NPA management through an ARC-AMC structure.
Yes, I think I was saying that seems to be, from our perspective, that the focus on growth is really critical, as well as some new areas of potential reforms. The key right now, getting out of this very difficult economic spot that the Indian economy is in, that the global economy is in, is really to figure out measures that are durable, strong opportunities for recovery and growth. It appears that the government is focused on those things. The question, I think, which has always been the challenge in the past, and it will remain today, is implementation. To what extent can these actually move forward in a fashion that is quick enough, strong enough to ensure that there is this recovery, this opportunity to create jobs, to increase investment. And this is not just in the real economy, but also the challenges of the financial system. It's encouraging to see that this budget did focus on the financial system, and there are measures put in place that could address the rising NPLs and challenges to asset quality, and ultimately the supply of credit that's going to be very much necessary to stimulate growth moving forward. But overall, I think an increase in CapEx, looking at measures to make the financial system more resilient to supply, impetus to growth, and certainly a big focus on healthcare and ensuring that livelihoods continue to improve, and that ultimately the pandemic resides and people can move on with their lives and not worry about the virus. That is critical, and hopefully that will ultimately lay the foundation for stronger growth that will allow the government over the medium term to then have a more forceful fiscal consolidation roadmap. But many questions remain in regards to implementation, ultimately how that will be achieved. But I think the focus of the budget seems to be well placed.
Okay, the focus is well placed, and of course implementation and execution always a challenge. But Rathin Roy, I know that you've probably been poring over the budget fine print and doing the budget arithmetic. So on balance, what do you make of the budget numbers as well as many of the policy announcements that have come in from the government?
Let me start by saying that the government has very credibly presented a transparent budget this time, for the first time in 3 years. Let me also say that it is good that the government has decided to bring off-budget stuff on budget this year. Let me also say that I'm very relieved that the report of the 15th Finance Commission means that the devolution to the states will not be cut. Having said that, I want to challenge the narrative that I sense that I'm getting here. There has been look, from a macroeconomic perspective, what you want to see is that increased financing in the budget goes to capital expenditure. Okay? What is increased financing going to capital expenditure? Where is it going to come from? It's going to come from borrowing. Why? Because every year since 1981, the government of India, including in Chidambaram's time, about 60 to 70% of their borrowing goes for revenue expenditure. So even with the enhanced fiscal deficit, in fact, the proportion of the fiscal deficit going for capex has fallen since the BE. And next year, it is slated to basically go up very marginally from the 2019-20 BE. So you're not seeing a macroeconomic structural shift in the budget's positioning to fund capital expenditure. It's okay to talk about 9 lakh crores here and 10 lakh crores here. That doesn't matter in the wash. What percentage of the money that you're borrowing is going for capex? Answer, the same percentage as in the BE, and next year, only incrementally more than the BE. So I challenge this business of a capex-led recovery. All right, that is one. Number two, the Achilles heel of the government for a long time was it was not able to collect the taxes it sought to collect. Obviously, in a pandemic year, it has collected much less, but actually it has not. Tax revenues haven't fallen by much because, and your middle class viewers will love this, and your corporate Bombay will love this, I think this is a good thing. Petroleum prices fell. We kept taxes such that pump prices were the same. So union excise duties went up very sharply. It's a good thing. And that made up in large measure for falls in direct and indirect tax collections. Great. But what collapsed, and this really surprises me, is disinvestment receipts. This has been a very good year for Bombay. Profit-led recovery, buoyant stock markets, fantastic capital markets. Mr. Ambani has gone debt-free. And the government of India's disinvestment program in a year when there were huge opportunities in the markets to disinvest actively and people seeking avenues and outlets for investment fails. And the consequence of that failure has been a hit on the revenue side, which has taken up about a third of the increase in the fiscal deficit, collectively with the taxes. Now, on the expenditure side, what I see is a lot of necessary spending. I'm talking about the RE and BE, yeah, on essentially two things:
Yes.
Food and fertilizer subsidies and NREGA. The Employment Guarantee Program and food and fertilizer subsidies consumes about 90% of the increased expenditure of 4 lakh crores. 90%. So where's the macroeconomic stimulus? You've had a profit-led recovery for corporate India. And what you've managed to do is make sure people don't go hungry by feeding them. And you provided them with some employment in the form of an NREGA. There is nothing else in that stimulus. So I must conclude that in 1920, there has been no macroeconomic stimulus. Now in 2021, what I see, again, in terms of the financing in the budget, is a very modest increase in capital expenditure financed by the fiscal deficit. I then see a curtailment in revenue expenditure and the numbers projected for both the NREGA and food subsidy coming down, which is you're going to unwind what you did last year.
Yeah.
Therefore, I think this is a business as usual budget that has averted tragedy, but has not changed the growth direction of the Indian economy in ways that I would have liked to have seen. There has been no attention paid to output composition of demand. There's been no attention paid to export-led growth. There has been talk, but not much walking. And on that track record, I am worried next year, particularly since my last point, privatization and disinvestment receipts again are expected to be 1,75,000. It should be very clear now to the Minister of Intelligence that the capability to privatize does not exist in the finance ministry, and they need to get that state capacity there fast.
Yes, that is a challenge, and that will be something to watch very closely, as William was also pointing out. Sangita Reddy also here with us. Sangita, many thanks for joining us. You know, the big picture that you take away from budget 2021, and more importantly, for the healthcare sector specifically, you know, there's of course the usual allocation, but there's also the announcement of a new scheme which plays out over the next 5 years. On balance, Sangita, what do you make of it?
So first, Shireen, I want to say that overall this is a balanced budget which took care of many critical factors. The fact that health and wellness was the first among the 6 pillars for budget 22 is something which we've been waiting for. And innovation and R&D also held a very critical place. Yes, there's been a significant enhancement in the health budget. Now, how much of this is going to go into direct infrastructure? A significant portion we know is for the vaccination, for water and sanitation. However, it's important for us now to focus on the vaccination because the speed and scale at which we're able to roll that out will enable the economy to come back. And I think once that's allocated to healthcare, this amount should continue to stay within the healthcare budget is another one of our hopes. While at the same time, the focus on health, wellness will reduce the burden of disease, enhance the focus on non-communicable disease. And ultimately, I think the overall budget also focused on relief, reforms, and of course, revival. But the structural points are something you've heard me from Vicky ask for a long time, which is really the patient capital, the focus on infrastructure, asset reconstruction, divestment and privatization. All those, you know, really feature appropriately. And the fiscal deficit handling, the enhanced capital expenditure, the glide path, all these are, I think, call out significant steps. Right now, I think we should be very happy with the budget, find ways to work with it because nothing can happen alone. So industry, citizens, all of us should work with the budget and ensure our progressive growth. I want to say one last line, Shireen, and that is, I think, if healthcare is given the focus, it can generate employment, enhance India's position on the global stage, and potentially do for India in this coming decade what IT did in the last few decades. So let's focus on healthcare.
Yes, so the budget does focus on healthcare, but let's see, how it plays out, as I pointed out, over the next few years. Rathin, you wanted to make a quick point, and then I'll get William in.
Yes, just wanted to say that I would be very surprised if anyone in FICCI ever said anything critical about any budget. They haven't since 1950. I just want to point out as a factual matter that the healthcare provisioning in a year of the pandemic has been the difference between the revised estimate healthcare expenditure and the budget estimate healthcare expenditure is very, very small. Is very, very small. So again, you are living on a promise. Again, you are living on a promise in an area where you have not delivered on record in a pandemic in the 1920 budget. The entire increase in expenditure that I have seen, I repeat, 90% has gone to feeding people and for Narega, not for healthcare. So therefore, on record, I'm going to be skeptical about the sort of pronouncements in next year's budget. We shall see.
Okay. So, William, I want to get you to respond to the quality of the expenditure as well as the enhancement of expenditure, the point that was being made there by Rathin. And also, separately, the economic survey has a whole chapter on why sovereign rating agencies have a bias against India, and there needs to be much more transparency in the way that sovereign rating agencies deal with India. There's no reason why, in the government's words, India deserves a BBB minus rating, and that we shouldn't be beholden to rating agencies, and fiscal policy should not be dictated by that. I want to get you to respond to both the expenditure issue as well as what the survey lays out in terms of rating agencies.
Absolutely. With regards to Rathin's points, I mean, these are well taken. I think I would say, and I think this is related to your second question too, is India's biggest challenge is the lack, really on a relative basis, the lack of fiscal space, the lack of infinite resources and tremendous demand on the resources available. And that means a real prioritization of spending has to take place. It's very clear that there's a tremendous need for infrastructure spending in India that could have very high multipliers for growth in the future, but it's also very clear that there needs to be social welfare spending and measures to support the financial system. But first and foremost, households, the average Indian citizen needs to be taken care of ultimately, and this is a real challenge, and it's a large government footprint in the economy where wages have to be taken care of as well. And so this is the challenge, and the solution is growth. The higher the growth dynamic in India, the larger the pie that is created, that then can be the revenues from that can then be allocated accordingly. And so that's really, from our perspective, the challenge that India is facing. Growth is paramount in order to be able to channel those resources. And to Rathin's point, this is true. I mean, ultimately, we can talk about increases here and declines here on a relative basis, but because we're dealing with a limited opportunity set, ultimately, you really need to expand that pie, and that's why growth is so important. And over time, that will have increasing effect. To that point about fiscal, that's the biggest challenge from our perspective for India's sovereign credit rating, is the fact that the debt to GDP ratio, which is driven by very large fiscal deficits, really is an outlier for the peer group or the other sovereign credits that are in a similar rating space, which is just above investment grade BAA by our scale. And just to that point, India's debt to GDP ratio was about 72% last year before the pandemic, and the peer group was about 50%. This year, we expect it to jump to about 90%, and the peer group to be at 60%. So that's a very big gap between India and the peer group. What separates India from the peer group is the fact that it has such a high level of growth, a large economy that can allow it to sustain those deficits and a higher level of debt. It's also all in local currency, which is an important feature for India that allows it to not have the same types of concerns that other economies might that are borrowing in foreign currency. But it's a real constraint, and that's a constraint on the rating. Our methodology is very transparent. It's publicly available. We focus on 4 key factors. We focus on a series of variables on economic growth, fiscal strength, on institutional governance issues, and other susceptibilities to event risk, we call, which is the banking system, looking at areas of balance of payments risk, government funding, et cetera. So fundamentally, it's very transparent. It is, it's comparable globally. There's no bias to it.
There's no bias to it. Rathin, I have exactly 10 seconds. We have to wrap up the show. 10 seconds to you.
Bill is absolutely right when he says that there is no bias to it. The bias is ubiquitous in the sense that the per capita GDP of a country is the largest deadweight on any rating exercise. Having said that, that point should be made when the going is good. When the going is bad, it sounds a bit like whining. That's not a good thing to do.
All right, Rathin Roy, William and Sangita Reddy, many thanks for joining us here as we decode Budget 2021. Appreciate your time and wish you all the very, very best. We are going to take a break here on CNBC TV 18. Don't go anywhere. We're back with the Finance Minister's interview. That's coming up in 30 seconds.
Insurance partner